Hey everybody, welcome to Grace with Paul Gray. In the late 1800s, streets and commercial buildings were primarily made of brick. Eastern Kansas was one of the leading brick producing areas of the country due to the abundant supply of clay and shale that produced high quality bricks. Where I live, Lawrence, Kansas, was home of one of the largest brick producing companies in the Midwest, the Lawrence Vitrified Brick Company. The cover picture of my book, Convertible Conversations, was taken at the very site where a brick plant was built by John McFarland in the late 1800s. The original plant wasn't large enough to produce the demand for bricks, so a group was formed to purchase and enlarge it. After becoming incorporated and building a new plant, they were producing 35,000 bricks every day and employing over 40 people. People in Lawrence, Kansas talked about the vitrified fireplace that continually burned day and night at 2,000 degrees. The plant workers, 3 shifts that worked 24 hours a day, had to wear specially made protective outfits just when they got close to the building where the fire was, and that fire seemingly burned forever. The company had a fleet of horse-drawn wagons that every day delivered 35,000 bricks to building sites in Lawrence, as well as to railroad stations where they would be loaded and shipped around the Midwest. Many of the buildings, streets, and homes in Lawrence and at the University of Kansas were made with bricks that were made in the continual fire there. From the 1890s through the first decade of the 1900s, this 2,000-degree fire raged continually, and over that time it produced a total of over 200 million bricks. Everybody in Lawrence and surrounding areas knew about the vitrified fireplace. The area that produced the shale and the clay for the bricks became a huge hole in the middle of the city where workers continuously dug this seemingly never-ending supply of shale and clay from which to make the bricks. That hole, of course, is now a lake. The vitrified fireplace was part of the company's huge several-acre industrial site. Well, after nearly 20 years, the Lawrence Vitrified Brick Company was closed and abandoned due to the competition of concrete now becoming a better source for building and for pavements. Greens Lake, as it was called then, was created after the production ended, leaving this huge hole in the ground. And that's where the picture for my book was taken, Greens Lake. During the early part of World War II, workers pulled down the brick kilns, which also housed an old brick plant, stables, offices, and various other buildings. The kilns were reinforced with railroad irons. Once taken down, that plant yielded 3 railroad cars full of railroad irons that they then turned into scrap metal for the war effort. In 1930, a man by the name of Will Green bought the property and began Lawrence's first and only zoo. He had an interest in animals and relics, and he began building the zoo cages and acquiring animals for the collection. The first were a pair of coyotes that had been captured near there. Then they soon added bears and alligators and coyotes and a crow and raccoons and red-faced foxes and a monkey and porcupine and mountain lions and Gila monsters and all kinds of local animals that were kept in cages. Green also used a building on the grounds to house a community museum of old tools, especially those that were used in the Vitrified Brick Company. He opened up a park, a lake, a museum, and a zoo to the public free of charge from the 1930s to 1951. Rumor has it that an old steam shovel is still buried in this lake. Around the edge of the lake, more than a dozen small cabins were built. Originally, they were used by guests on vacation. In 1942, they were used in the war as emergency housing for defense workers. The Great Flood of 1951 in eastern Kansas practically wiped out Greens Park. Most of the items in the museum were moved to Green's hardware store downtown, which I remember still going on in the 1960s. Green eventually sold the park to the VFW. Today, the property is called the Sandra Shaw Community Health Park. Now, everything I've told you so far is taken from a variety of articles that can be found on Google and other sites and at the Watkins Museum in Lawrence. Following is my fictitious continuation of this story. In the late 1990s, a religious cult started living on the property. They claimed that they found ancient hidden articles that had been preserved by descendants of their god, an angry god that would burn people forever if they didn't believe correctly, say magic words, and appease the god with a variety of sacrifices. The cult leaders refused to allow questions and even claimed that their fictitious ogre god was actually good. They used fear tactics to control their followers. They literally rewrote the history of the vitrified fireplace and coined a new word for it, hell, H-E-L-L, a word that had never existed before. People who lived in Lawrence when the brick company was fired up every day knew the place was only the vitrified fireplace, which made bricks in a 2,000-degree fire oven that literally burned day and night for literally 2 decades. But eventually, because something that was not true was repeated over and over and over again, new cult members and followers, and even the general public, came to believe in a fictitious place called hell. They believed it was real, and they believed this place existed and would be burned for it. People would be burned in it forever if they didn't comply with this ogre god's rules. Well, while that seems preposterous, that's very close to how today's version of hell came about. I'll continue next time. Thanks, everybody.